The Halo Infinite Technical Preview has finally dropped, and we've been lucky enough to give it a go and have a really deep analysis of the game. So in today's video, we're going to be covering everything from the maps that are playable, the weapons that you can use, the visuals and the performance of the game in terms of FPS, lag, latency, as well as look at the balancing of the gameplay, which weapons are extremely strong and which aren't, and whether or not this game leans towards the classic style of Halo games like Halo 3, or is it more like the more recent ones like Halo 5. That and so much more in today's video. And if you're one of the lucky ones that are able to play the technical preview, or you just want to talk about it with others or hear more about the game, be sure to join our Discord. We have a chat room dedicated to Halo Infinite. I'll leave an invite code in the pinned comment down below. But with that all said and done, let's dive right into the video. So first up, let's talk about gameplay. After a fair amount of matches, it's quite safe to say that Halo Infinite Multiplayer leans more towards the classic style of Halo 3 gameplay. However, there are a few additional features that lean more towards Call of Duty or Halo 5, that being sprinting, clamber, aiming down sights, and sliding. Whether or not these are positive additions or negative ones, we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. But what is evident is that Halo Infinite is trying to appeal to traditional Halo players, from Halo Combat Evolved up to Halo 3, as well as the modern Halo players of Halo 4, Halo Reach, Halo 5. So no matter what camp you're in, the gameplay might not feel perfect to you, but you will enjoy the nuances that come from each Halo game. However, I do believe Halo Infinite resonates more with Halo 3 more than any other Halo game. Next up, let's talk about Live Fire, the Day 1 map on Halo Infinite. It's a very traditional Halo map, with lots of different height variations across the map, with many open and closed avenues, which allows players to approach combat that suits them the best. So positioning is very important in Live Fire. Compared to your traditional Halo maps, this one is quite a bit bigger, and there are a few positive and negatives to that, which I'll explain a bit later, but overall this is quite a safe map for Halo. It doesn't introduce any new concepts or ideas, it just allows you to play the vanilla version of Halo Infinite. Next up, let's talk about weapons and their balancing. First up is the traditional AR. It acts and behaves just as you expect from Halo 3, and whilst it's strong for sustained damage, it does feel a little bit too deadly at longer ranges. So it definitely makes the AR a little bit too strong compared to other weapons that you can pick up, because its DPS is just too strong in close, medium and long range at this point. Moving on to the Needler, it definitely feels quite decent compared to older games. In Halo 3, it wasn't necessarily that strong, and with the AR being a generally good all-rounder in Halo 3, there was no point to pick up the Needler. But here, it definitely feels like its DPS has increased, so for players who enjoy a faster rate of fire, they might enjoy the Needler. The Commando feels a little bit unwieldy at full auto, but the trigger can be feathered for a more manageable recoil, this being quite a common feature in most FPSs. A good example to think of is Soldier 76 from Overwatch. His AR that he used had a lot of recoil to manage, but you got the most efficiency in terms of recoil and damage by feathering 3 shots per wave. So this is what you can expect with the Commando in Halo Infinite. Moving over to quite an interesting weapon, the Heat Wave. It is very fun to use, but definitely feels quite unpredictable. You're able to shoot a row of bolts either horizontally or vertically, and these bolts will recoil off multiple walls. However, these recoils are quite random, which definitely contributes to the unpredictability of the weapon. But what is clear is that this weapon doesn't feel like a close range or medium ranged weapon. I definitely recommend the Needler or the AR in those type of situations. The Heat Wave definitely feels like a weapon to use when you're trying to catch off an enemy trying to flee. So for example, if they had the height advantage but took too much damage from you and tried to run away, you can flip the gun horizontally and shoot up in the room that they were in, and hopefully the bolts will recoil enough to hit the enemy. A good comparison to this, and I hate to mention the game again, Overwatch had this feature as well. Hansa, a sniper character, had this weaponry as well, but there was a lot of complaints with that feature in terms of bad game feel, because those bolts could actually headshot and do massive amounts of damage because of it. And it feels like the Heat Wave might have this same issue. I don't know if the bolts can cause headshots, but it's going to feel like really bad gameplay if you just instantly die to a random stray bolt that headshots you, especially when you don't even know where the player running the Heat Wave is. So as players get more comfortable with the Heat Wave and get better using the weapon, It'll be interesting to see if this weapon will get nerfed in any way. But moving on to more miscellaneous information, you are not playing against other players in this technical demo, you're only playing against bots, so that means a 4v4 against AI. But as for the AI difficulty, they're pretty easy, but they're not total zombies. They do represent a bit of a challenge, but for pro Halo players and FPS games alike, you could find yourself being a little bit bored after a couple of hours of gameplay. In terms of the weapon drills game mode, it seems pretty basic, but definitely useful for brand new players. But I do believe that this game mode is quite important. I truly believe Halo Infinite will be a new entry point to bring in new potential Halo fans, so new game modes like Weapon Drills mode definitely feels quite welcome. As for the UI, customization interface felt a little bit clunky to navigate around, at least compared to MCC, but I do believe all of that is very subject to change. And finally, and certainly not least, we want to stress that this technical preview isn't even a beta. As EcksToo has highlighted on his Twitter, Halo Infinite developers have clearly stated that the game is just past alpha stage, but is certainly not anywhere near beta stage. So a lot of what we've just talked about is definitely subject to change. Now shifting over to stability and polish, I did leave this more towards the end of the video because, as I mentioned, this is not a beta, it's far earlier than that. So these feel a little bit nitpicky and definitely are going to be fixed down the line. Loading times are quite long. You're expected to wait about 5 minutes or more at a black screen during first startup, and that's coming from us loading it on an NVMe SSD. There are graphical errors in the main menus, shimmerings and pop-ins, but it doesn't seem present in gameplay. You can fix this, however, by putting the effects quality setting to the lowest, but everything else can run on ultra if you please. When matchmaking, there are long loads, hangs, and being booted back into the main menu. And we also did have one crash during in-game while we were waiting to be respawned. However, I do believe most of these issues are fixed now. The reason for these issues is likely because of Microsoft's Azure servers just had so much traffic that some of them actually crashed. But now that most eligible players have downloaded their copy of Halo Infinite, I do believe traffic will slow down now. Moving over to performance. The game was running on an RTX 2060 at 1080p and FPS was definitely favorable. And for professional players, they're likely going to drop it down to high quality or even low quality to get that 240 FPS goodness. And after giving you all of that technical dump, let's take a step back and evaluate Halo Infinite on its positives and its negatives. Halo games have had quite a bad rap for a while now, that the fans are kind of starved for something really good. And personally, I do believe Halo Infinite will fix that. The game is very akin to the classic Halo 3, which I think many people wanted. And if the game feels this good this early on, I'm really excited to see how polished and perfected it will be when the multiplayer version of the game finally launches. When it comes to extra features like sprinting and sliding, it might disgust a few core traditional Halo fans, and I totally understand why they feel that way, but in terms of sprinting, I think it's a lot better than it was in, say, Halo 5. The animations and movements feel so much more snappier that whilst you can't fire your weapon while running, being able to stop and shoot is a lot more cleaner and faster, so that the gameplay actually feels pretty good. I'm not a massive fan of the sliding, however. A good comparison to that is in Apex Legends, and whilst it definitely feels really good when traversing large terrain, when you're fighting in a more enclosed map, it can be really frustrating to see players be able to flip their hitbox from a vertical standing position to a horizontal sliding position almost instantly. It pulls away from the style of gameplay that we see in CSGO or Halo 3. But I do believe that type of gameplay is here to stay. I don't think they're going to be removing it in the final product. But if I can bring it back to sprinting, it does raise another issue. Being able to sprint and slide changes your behavior when it comes to playing in certain maps. And Live Fire, the first map we got to play on Halo Infinite, is a really good example of that. You have to make the maps a little bit bigger if you're able to sprint. Otherwise, what would be the point of the feature? And whilst that makes sense, it can feel very empty at times when playing Halo Infinite. It takes a little bit longer to find an enemy and engage in combat than you would in Halo 3. I do believe there are solutions, and I'm not talking about removing sprinting. I do think the maps of these size don't warrant a 4v4. 8 players in a map like Livefire feels a little bit too big. Making it a 5v5 and upping the total player count to 10 makes a lot more sense, I feel. But when it comes to weapons, I'm actually kind of positive about it. I do want the AR restricted a bit more, however, because they're not supposed to be a long-range weapon, and I want to see more variation in what weapons you can use and what works best in certain maps or situations. I don't want the AR to just be a massive all-rounder again like we saw in Halo 3. There were other things where weapons deal a lot of damage and you can run out of health really quickly, and regenning that health feels a little bit longer, and I feel that can be quite negative because it can breed stagnation in battles. People are going to take far less risk if you have lower HP and longer regen times, and I think that's what made Halo 3 so fun. You were able to take those risks. We don't want another situation like Overwatch where playing defensively and safer is far more important than actually taking those game-changing risks. For visuals, I can understand why some people are a little bit frustrated that this game doesn't look next gen. It was a big issue for Halo Infinite when they released their first trailer a year ago, but honestly, I think the multiplayer version of the game doesn't have to have that issue. When it comes to a game trying to push into the esports scene, clarity in gameplay reigns above all. So I think it makes a lot of sense to reduce the visual noise that we see in a lot of these fancy next-gen games when you're trying to actually play a game at a higher skill level. It's why a lot of pro players in Fortnite or CSGO run on the lowest graphical setting. It's to strip down everything that doesn't matter, and it allows them to focus on everything that does. And I think this is why Halo Infinite Multiplayer doesn't need to be graphically fancy, especially when this game needs to support Xbox One and PS4 as well as next-gen consoles, not to mention the majority of PC players that are running GTX 1060s and 1070s, which according to Steam is the most popular graphics card among them all. Halo Infinite Multiplayer is trying to make the game available to as many people as possible, but I do believe this single player experience will be much more graphically enhanced, showcasing just what the Xbox Series X can do. But this is where I pass the question over to you guys. Are you one of the lucky ones that are able to play the technical preview today? And if so, what is your favorite Halo game and how does it compare to it? I'm really interested in your thoughts and opinions on that question, so be sure to write them down in the comments section down below. I'll read all of them and I will get back to some of you as well. And if you want to talk more about Halo with other like-minded people, again, be sure to join our Discord in the pinned comment down below. Besides that, guys, I have been Charlie, you've been watching EcksToo, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, guys.